I was grabbing coffee with an old friend I hadn't seen in years. He seemed different, sharper, more intense. When I asked how his life was going, he didn't give me the usual update on work or hobbies. Instead, he leaned across the table and told me with this kind of manic clarity that he'd finally taken the red pill. He had this look in his eyes, a giddy excitement, as if he'd just discovered the secret blueprints to the universe. He started explaining how he now saw through the matrix of modern dating and social expectations, talking about biological truths, as if he were reading from a textbook he memorized overnight. To him, the world wasn't a collection of people anymore. It was a simulation he had finally managed to unplug from. But then the conversation took a chilling turn. I mentioned that he seemed more confident, and I thought that was a positive sign. Suddenly, his expression went cold. The light in his eyes just vanished. He shook his head and whispered, "It doesn't matter anyway, I'm starting to see the black pill." Iman. The enthusiasm was replaced by a hollow clinical resignation. He began describing how his own genetics and the rigged nature of reality had already predetermined his failure, and that no amount of awakening could save him from a void he now believed was inevitable. Watching that instantaneous shift from the high of feeling like a sci-fi protagonist to the crushing weight of total nihilism was deeply unsettling. He wasn't just sharing an opinion, he was trapped in a vocabulary of metaphors that felt less like a philosophy and more like a digital cage. It's a language born from a single movie scene in 1999, yet it has morphed into a sprawling, complex, and often dangerous internet ideology. How did a simple choice between two color pills become the shorthand for a generation's radicalization? And what happens when the truth you find leads you to a place where hope no longer exists?
That vocabulary you just described, the red pill and the black pill, that's really the key to everything. It's central to understanding what you called the digital cage of male supremacy.
And it is a cage, isn't it? That sounds like one.
It absolutely is. We're talking about this highly interconnected network known collectively as the Manosphere, which has evolved from these fringe online dating forums into a really potent extremist ideology.
So that's our mission for this deep dive then, to trace that journey.
Exactly. The core mission is to understand the sociological impact of this philosophy on the manosphere. We need to look at how these digital subcultures are redefining traditional masculinity through, frankly, anti-feminist ideological frameworks.
And to figure out what the ultimate consequence is. Because it's not just talk, is it?
Not at all. This ideology has profound societal risks. I mean, since 2014, it has motivated the killings of at least 50 people.
50? That's staggering.
It is. So we're going to explore the language, the psychological underpinnings, the role of algorithmic radicalization, and these information cocoons, and really dig into the systemic risks of these fatalistic online ideologies that lead to social alienation or, in the worst cases, violent extremism.
That story about my friend really shows how quickly personal dissatisfaction can just mutate into this all-encompassing worldview. So let's unpack the manosphere. It's an easy term to throw around, but what are its boundaries? What does it actually look like in concrete terms?
That's a great question, because it's vital to see it as an ecological system. It's not one single place. It's an interconnected network.
Right.
The manosphere is this sprawling collection of websites, blogs, dedicated online forums. I mean, we're talking about everything from corners of Reddit to these specific incel forums to 4chan.
And a ton of YouTube channels, I imagine.
Oh, a massive infrastructure of YouTube channels, social media pages, apps. It's everywhere.
So it's like a decentralized digital nation, all built on a shared premise. And you trace its conceptual origin not to a political movement, but to the pickup artist community, the PUA community from the early 2000s. That seems like a strange starting point for a political ideology.
It does, but it established the fundamental adversarial premise. The PUA movement, it really started as a kind of dating strategy and self-help hybrid. It was targeting men who felt inexperienced or awkward.
Right.
And their goal was highly instrumental. They desired to, and this is a direct quote, bed as many attractive women as possible.
So it was about quantity, a system.
Exactly. Quantity and systematic seduction, often through what can only be described as manipulation.
I remember that era. It was all based on these weird pseudoscientific rules for talking to people.
That's spot on. To lend any kind of legitimacy to its claims and tactics, the PUA community cherry-picked and, frankly, grossly misinterpreted evolutionary psychology. They relied on these reductive animal analogy and pseudoscience to essentialize sex and gender roles.
So they stripped all the complexity out of relationships.
Completely. Relationships were treated as predictable, transactional games that men could win if they just followed the PUA system. And this reductive biological determinism, this idea that your behavior is just fixed by your anatomy or your genetics, that laid the core intellectual groundwork for the entire manosphere rhetoric that followed.
And I guess once you have that foundation that relationships are just a cold transactional game, it's a pretty short leap to the Matrix metaphor. So tell us how the red pill transforms this simple dating frustration into a grand philosophical awakening.
The Matrix metaphor is the conceptual glue that holds it all together. The red pill is the experience of waking up to what they call the sad truth of reality.
And that truth is?
Within the manosphere, this truth is defined as the highly competitive and zero-sum nature of male-female relations. The central premise is that society, the matrix, lies to men. It tells them that if they're sensitive and emotionally available, what they call blue pill behavior, they'll find happiness.
But the red pill says the opposite.
The red pill perspective argues the opposite. It says men must constantly compete with other men for status, and that relationships are power struggles where the man has to extract what he wants, which they narrowly define as penetrative sex, while strategically denying women what they supposedly want.
Which is commitment and resources.
Commitment, resources, and emotional security. Yes.
And that second option, the blue pill, that represents not just naive men, but men who actively conform to the societal norms that the manosphere rejects.
That's right. The blue pillar is the weak, naive man who has been indoctrinated by feminism and traditional social norms that might emphasize equality or empathy.
So it's more than just dating tips.
Oh, much more. What makes the red pill so powerful is that it's not just a collection of dating tips. Taking the red pill means changing how you view yourself in relation to every single person in your life, your friends, your colleagues, your family. It transforms into a fully articulated worldview.
So every interaction gets filtered through this new lens.
Every single one. If you believe women are genetically predisposed to cheating, or that their career success is solely to attract high-status men, then every interaction you have is filtered through that hostile transactional lens.
Okay, so if the red pill is the intellectual framework, the belief system, we need to understand the formal hierarchy of oppression that makes this worldview function. People often mix up terms like sexism and misogyny, but in sociology, they represent very distinct mechanisms of control. Let's clarify this structure. Patriarchy, sexism, misogyny, and toxic masculinity.
It's really helpful to visualize this as a tiered system of power. Patriarchy is the overarching social organization. It's the ceiling, if you will, where men hold structural power and authority, and women are generally excluded from it. This is the system itself.
Okay, so the system of power is patriarchy. How does that system justify its own existence?
That's where sexism comes in. Sexism is the ideology. It's the legislative pillar that rationalizes and justifies patriarchy.
How does it do that?
It does this primarily by naturalizing inherent differences. For example, sexism asserts that women's value is biologically determined solely by fertility and youth, thereby justifying why they should occupy subordinate roles, focus on reproduction and domesticity.
Yeah.
It basically says this is the way the world is because biology demands it.
So sexism provides the intellectual argument, making the imbalance seem inevitable, natural, even desirable for social order. But what happens if a woman challenges that order? How is she kept in line?
And that's the function of misogyny. Misogyny is the active enforcement mechanism. It's the executive and judiciary branch of patriarchy.
So it's about policing behavior.
Exactly. It's the hostile policing, the harassment, the bullying of women who violate those patriarchal norms and expectations. If a woman is ambitious or challenges male authority or is sexually autonomous, she transgresses. Misogyny is the hostile backlash designed to restore male dominance.
So misogyny isn't just a general hatred of all women. It's a selective enforcement aimed at those who deviate from the patriarchal script.
Crucially, a woman who fulfills her assigned traditional role might not experience overt misogyny, but the ambitious, challenging woman absolutely will. It's a very effective system of social control. Now, the final piece is toxic masculinity.
And this piece feels like it's directed internally, punishing men who fail to live up to the standard.
It is. It's the rigid gender construction that polices male behavior itself. It's the beliefs that comprise sexism, the idea that men must be unemotional, strong, and dominant, internalized by men.
So the logic of misogyny gets turned back on men.
Precisely. The logic of misogyny is redirected toward men who fail to uphold that ideal. They are shamed for sensitivity, for vulnerability, or for a lack of dominance. Toxic masculinity is the internal stick, ensuring men adhere to the hegemonic ideal even when it is personally damaging.
That makes the system much clearer. So the Manosphere takes this traditional structure and overlays it with new concepts, synthesizing it into a defined male supremacy ideology where men are dominant, superior, and entitled to women's labor. But how do we measure an ideology like this? Research has distilled it into 3 key measurable factors.
This is where we get to the core beliefs that drive action. Researchers developed what's called the Male Supremacy Scale, or MSS, to quantify this ideology. And the 3 factors are designed to capture the justification, the external threat, and the internal expectation.
Let's start with the justification. Female dishonesty, FD. This sounds like the engine of all the distrust.
Is the absolute foundation of their entire worldview. Female dishonesty is the belief that women are inherently flawed and unreliable. They are depicted as genetically predisposed to manipulation, lying, cheating, and duplicity.
And this isn't just like anecdotal complaints.
Not at all. It's framed as a fixed biological imperative.
So a core belief is literally that women have a biological drive to cheat on their partners, or that you can't trust women to be faithful in relationships.
Absolutely. This belief system demands that men be constantly on guard and view relationships as inherently risky endeavors where they will inevitably be exploited. And the consequence of this belief is profound.
Oh, so
if women are biologically flawed, it justifies why they must be excluded from positions of power, which reinforces the patriarchal structure. The inherent untrustworthiness of women is the justification for men's dominance.
Okay, so if female dishonesty is the internal justification, what's the external threat the Manosphere rallies against?
That would be the second factor, anti-feminism, AF. For male supremacists, feminism is not a social movement to be debated. It is framed as a malignant conspiracy designed to emasculate men and oppress them.
The language is probably pretty paranoid.
It's very paranoid. Things like, feminists are seeking to control men, and women use feminism to gain an unfair advantage over men.
This reflects that zero-sum thinking you mentioned earlier, that any gain in women's rights is perceived as a direct loss of male dominance, which must be hostilely resisted.
Precisely. They view themselves as victims of a societal plot, which transforms personal difficulties into political grievance. If I fail, it's not because of me, it's because the feminists have stacked the deck against me. And this conspiratorial narrative is incredibly effective at recruiting and retaining users.
And finally, the third factor, the aspirational component. Women like alphas, WLA. This defines the ideal man that users are constantly striving to be.
Yes, WLA defines the modern hegemonic masculine ideal. It posits that women are biologically driven to seek out the highest status man possible, the alpha male.
So that dictates their entire mission in life.
It dictates that success is defined by wealth, high status, and possessing high testosterone, which acts as a shorthand for strength, dominance, and aggression. This factor gives men their mission statement: perform dominance perfectly, achieve high status, and women will biologically submit.
So if I'm understanding this correctly, these 3 concepts create a completely closed ideological loop. Women are fundamentally untrustworthy, FD. Society protects women and attacks men, AF. So the only way to succeed is to become a dominant, high-status alpha, WLA. It's a toxic recipe for ambition and entitlement.
That framework gives us the content of the ideology, but the medium is equally important. The internet doesn't just host these ideas. The platforms themselves actively structure and engineer the process of radicalization. This takes us away from simple content and into the digital biases and constraints of the platforms.
Let's start with YouTube. It's often cited as a major pipeline for radical content. How does a seemingly neutral video site become an ideological delivery system?
Because platforms are never neutral. They are designed to maximize engagement, and their algorithms dictate the flow of information. For years, YouTube focused on maximizing clicks, but then they shifted their reward structure to focus on time spent watching, and the incentives changed fundamentally.
So instead of being rewarded for a compelling title, creators were rewarded for content that held a user captive for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, or longer.
Exactly. This change incentivized content creators to produce deeply engaging, often intense, and frequently extreme content. Why? Because nuance is boring. Sensationalism holds attention. Conspiracy theories, highly charged emotional rants, and extreme ideological framing are far more effective at maximizing viewing time than moderate or balanced perspectives.
So the algorithm, just by doing its job, radicalizes people.
In essence, yes. The algorithm, by seeking maximum engagement time, essentially radicalizes users by serving them increasingly intense material, pulling them deeper and deeper into the manosphere's rabbit hole.
And social media platforms like Twitter or X now play a different role by shaping the style of communication.
Correct. Character limits and amplification mechanisms fundamentally constrain the conversation. They incentivize short, overly simplistic, and emotionally charged messages. You can't have a nuanced debate in 280 characters.
It trains you to be impulsive.
It trains users to respond impulsively, prioritizing hostility and anger and ignoring social norms like civility. This lack of nuance strengthens in-group identity. We understand the simple truth and solidifies out-group hostility toward the complexity of the outside world.
I see the term emotional contagion referenced here, where anger is described as a highly virulent thought germ. That suggests that the format isn't just delivering content, it's delivering an emotion.
That's precisely right. Emotional content, especially anger or resentment, spreads rapidly and is a key driver in the political coalescence of these digital networks.
So the anger is the glue.
When you are constantly exposed to content that validates your grievance and expresses it with hostility, your emotional baseline shifts. The anger itself becomes a shared commodity that binds the group together against the external threat: feminism, society, the blue pill.
Let's look at Reddit, which has historically been a massive incubator for these communities. How do subreddits facilitate this?
Subreddits act as highly effective information cocoons or echo chambers. They provide safe, curated spaces for the ideology to mature without any challenge.
Dissenting views are just filtered out.
Rigorously. Moderators enforce strict consensus using clear rules displayed in the sidebar. When a community dedicated to male supremacy eliminates all discussion that contradicts its core tenets, say, prohibiting positive stories about relationships or discussions of empathy, it accelerates the ideological convergence of its users.
It sounds like they're creating a controlled experimental environment where the only available inputs reinforce the manosphere ideology.
It's an ideological pressure cooker. And the irony of dating apps is especially telling here. They were designed to facilitate connection, yet they amplify the very behaviors the manosphere is built upon.
How does expanded choice on dating apps lead to increased misogyny?
Well, while dating apps offer expansive choice, they amplify biases, particularly those favoring physical attractiveness. This system disproportionately privileges a small percentage of users and leaves the vast majority feeling disposable.
And that rejection gets fed back into the ideology.
The resulting failure and rejection are then interpreted by users through the red pill lens. The system is rigged against me. This outcome exacerbates misogynistic behavior in men who feel rejected and then deploy aggressive strategies, reacting with hostility when those strategies fail. Crucially, male supremacists view these apps as problematic, specifically because the app dynamic diminishes men's power and elevates women's power in the sexual interaction.
That brings us to the core social mechanism here, digital situationism. If the internet environment is so controlled, how does it shape the individual user's behavior and thought process?
The manosphere creates what social psychologists call a strong situation.
A strong situation.
Yes, a strong situation is an environment where the cultural rules, the specific jargon, the language norms, and the directives from moderators are so pervasive that they lead almost everyone to interpret events the same way and expect a uniform response.
So the environment itself is coercive, it pushes conformity.
Exactly. The platform, through its design and culture, incentivizes the expression of male supremacist ideas. This is key. It means people who might have moderate, non-toxic views offline are pushed toward expressing these extreme beliefs online because a strong situation of the digital community demands it for acceptance and belonging.
It validates their anger and gives them the words for it.
And provides a ready-made vocabulary to express it.
This isn't just about affirmation, though. It's about active thought modification. Let's discuss the idea that these communities perform cognitive behavioral harm, CBH, essentially a reverse CBT on users. This is where it gets really unsettling because they are actively teaching users to adopt harmful mental patterns.
They are. They are systemically introducing and validating harmful cognitive distortions. Think of standard cognitive behavioral therapy, which identifies distortions like catastrophizing or mind reading and challenges them against objective reality.
Right.
The manosphere does the inverse. It validates and reinforces these damaging patterns, presenting them as hard-won truth.
Can you walk us through a few examples of these cognitive distortions as they are applied within the manosphere?
Certainly. Let's take all-or-nothing thinking, seeing things in black and white. Within the manosphere, this manifest says, if I'm not a high-status alpha who can attract the top 1% of women, I am a low-status beta, and a total loser. There's no middle ground.
That eliminates the possibility of just being a normal person with a normal, messy life.
Precisely. Then we have catastrophizing. A minor setback, like a single failed dating interaction, is blown up. This rejection proves that I am genetically doomed to total failure and no woman will ever love me.
And the community affirms this disaster narrative rather than challenging it.
They do. What about distortions that rely on emotional logic?
Like emotional reasoning.
Exactly. Believing something is true because it feels true. The resentment and anger they feel are validated as evidence that the system must be rigged against them. The feeling of victimhood becomes proof of oppression.
And then there's labeling and overgeneralization.
Right. Instead of dealing with an individual woman who behaved badly, the user assigns false negative labels to the entire gender. All women are duplicitous gold diggers. This radical reprogramming transforms normal human difficulty like loneliness or failure into a catastrophic systemic conspiracy.
So the community takes personal pain, and instead of helping the individual confront reality, it hands them a specific, rigid, ideological framework that reinterprets that pain as external oppression, preventing any real growth.
That's the mechanism of cognitive behavioral harm. And the ultimate psychological result of internalizing all these messages is the nocebo effect of male supremacy.
The inverse of the placebo effect. Explain how this manifests.
With a placebo, a belief in a treatment produces a positive outcome. With the nocebo effect, the user adopts a belief system that inherently predicts negative outcomes. Male supremacy convinces the user that relationship failure, unhappiness, and loneliness are inevitable, predetermined by reality, genetics, or a rigged society.
So the belief causes the outcome.
Because the user believes this is true, they often behave in ways, through hostility, cynicism, or resignation, that ensure those adverse outcomes occur, thus confirming the framework's validity.
The ideology becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. The user is told the system is rigged, they act defensively and hostilely because they believe the system is rigged, which pushes people away, which confirms that the system is indeed rigged.
The framework, instead of solving their initial problems of isolation and loneliness, systematically codifies that isolation, giving it a political and biological excuse. It's a beautifully crafted intellectual trap.
We've established how the manosphere functions and how the red pill provides this intellectual high of knowing the truth. But the ideological journey often doesn't end in triumph. It ends in that crushing resignation I saw in my friend, the black pill. What exactly is the black pill?
The black pill is the ultimate expression of this ideological trap, and it's adopted most prominently by involuntarily celibate communities. It is a philosophy of total dogmatic hopelessness about dating and about life in general.
It's more than just pessimism.
It's a fatalistic, determined belief that hope itself is a delusion. It asserts that factors like genetics, specifically physical appearance and the rigged nature of reality, have permanently determined that unattractive men will never achieve sexual success or intimate companionship.
This sounds far more absolute than just being cynical. It's a total rejection of agency.
It is. To believe in self-improvement, to believe in optimism, or to believe that societal changes could mitigate your loneliness is considered blue pill thinking, a pathetic coping mechanism. Incels distinguish themselves from normies by believing they have privileged, if tragic, insight into this rigged reality.
And they position themselves at the very bottom of the hegemonic masculine hierarchy that the red pill defines, yet they still subscribe to the same criteria.
That's the central irony. They accept the WLA premise that women are biologically driven only to seek the highest status males, but then determine that they are excluded from that status. They believe women only seek chads, the top 1% of males who are physically attractive and high status, due to an evolutionary phenomenon known as hypergamy.
So their fate is sealed.
So they can't be chads, and they believe women are biologically inflexible, their fate is sealed.
This intense sense of exclusion points to some severe underlying issues. What does the psychological data reveal about the role of social exclusion and loneliness in this population?
Social exclusion, loneliness, and alienation are absolutely defining characteristics. When people experience rejection, whether it's real rejection or just perceived rejection on dating apps, it prompts a cascade of compensatory behaviors. On one hand, rejection tends to lead to an increase in aggression and hostility toward others.
That explains the venom and toxicity we see online.
But on the other hand, rejection simultaneously motivates excluded individuals to seek out and cling to new communities and friends, often by strongly conforming to the opinions of the group.
And the manosphere steps right in.
It provides that conforming community, offering a powerful counter-narrative. You aren't rejected because of personal factors. You are rejected because the world is structurally broken and anti-male.
It reframes personal vulnerability as political victimhood. How endemic is the loneliness within this demographic?
It's severe. A key finding from one survey of incel community showed that 50.8% reported having no friends.
Wow, half of them.
Over half. This points to a profound poverty of emotional intimacy. The profound need for connection and support, which is normal for all human beings, is channeled almost entirely into the single, narrow pursuit of sexual partners.
So they confuse sex with connection.
They confuse the need for sexual attraction with the need for deep emotional connection, love, and acceptance. When that narrow pursuit fails, the entire edifice of their emotional life just collapses.
If they feel this intense isolation and grievance, what psychological traits define their worldview outside of sexual anxiety? What about entitlement?
Male supremacists generally score very highly on the psychological entitlement scale. This is a stable, pervasive personality trait, a sense that one inherently deserves more than others, and that those deserved rewards, status, attention, sex, are being unjustly withheld by society.
And that sense of entitlement must fuel a deep sense of victimization.
Absolutely. It fosters a profound sense of grievance. They genuinely believe that feminism, modern society, and women are conspiring to muzzle and subdue men, making them second-class citizens.
Do they have specific examples?
They cite specific beliefs, such as the idea that rape laws are unfairly used by women to gain advantage over men, or that society prioritizes women's feelings over men's safety. This sense of being unjustly victimized by a system that owes them something is a powerful motivator for hostility.
This reliance on fixed hierarchies and rigid structures sounds highly compatible with authoritarian thinking. How do they score on established metrics for authoritarianism?
High scores on both right-wing authoritarianism, RWA, and social dominance orientation, SDO, are consistently observed. Let's start with SDO, which is the preference for hierarchical group relations.
The preference for hierarchy sounds perfectly aligned with the Manosphere's obsession with ranking people.
It is the organizing principle. SDO drives the perspective that groups should be ranked and groups should dominate and be superior to outgroups. The Manosphere's sexual market value, or SMV system, which ranks everyone on a scale of 1 to 10, is a textbook example of SDO logic in practice.
And the zero-sum game again.
It's all a zero-sum game. If women gain rights or power, it is by definition a threat and a loss to male dominance, which must be resisted.
And RWA, right-wing authoritarianism, that focuses on adherence to traditional social norms and authority figures.
Correct. RWA involves a profound love of authority, structure, and traditional values. The world is organized into morally superior in-groups and threatening out-groups. Feminists who are challenging traditional gender roles and the established patriarchal order are automatically placed in the threatening out-group, justifying the prejudice and hostility directed toward them.
So RWA provides the moral structure for the hierarchy.
Exactly. RWA provides the moral structure for the SDO-driven hierarchy.
When you combine hierarchy, entitlement, and a profound sense of victimization, you really need a unifying narrative to explain how all these elements connect. I assume that's where conspiratorial thinking enters the picture.
It's indispensable. Extremist ideologies cannot function without an external enemy and a grand theory of malevolence to explain why followers are suffering. Data shows a strong linear relationship between high scores on the conspiracy mentality scale and high male supremacy scores.
They need a villain.
They need these theories to frame their followers as victims of oppression. And the component of conspiratorial thinking that is most strongly correlated with male supremacy is irrational suspicion.
A general distrust of everything.
It's a profound, pervasive distrust in government, social institutions, media, and, critically, half the population women. This pervasive suspicion allows the conspiratorial, clear-eyed narratives of the red pill to thrive. When trust in objective mainstream information erodes, the Manosphere steps in and says, "We have the real answers, the secret blueprints that explain why you are suffering." This ideological and psychological framework just reinforces itself, trapping the user in a self-protecting bubble of paranoia. And when we examine the broader societal consequences, it becomes really clear that male supremacy doesn't exist in a vacuum. It shares significant ideological and psychological overlap with other forms of extremism, particularly in the political sphere.
What is the specific correlation between political ideology and male supremacy scores?
Well, studies show a strong positive relationship between general conservative political ideology and high male supremacy scores. When you break it down by specific party affiliation, individuals identifying as strong Republican consistently show the highest male supremacy scores across the political spectrum.
Is this correlation across all political views, or is it specific to certain policy areas?
It is primarily driven by political orientation on social issues, so attitudes toward gender roles, family structure, individual liberties related to sex and marriage, rather than economic issues like taxation or trade.
So it's about social order?
It's a narrative of grievance and the desire to restore traditional hierarchies and a perceived lost social order. That's the common denominator. It's also found that positive feelings toward Donald Trump are significantly related to higher male supremacy scores, suggesting that his rhetoric of perceived grievance and challenging political correctness resonated very strongly with this specific ideological alignment.
This idea of restoring a traditional order suggests a strong overlap with white supremacy, which also relies on narratives of lost dominance and the purity of traditional structures.
The ideologies are symbiotic. They follow parallel logics.
Yeah.
Both male supremacy and white supremacy rely on justifying systems of oppression on supposed genetic or biological grounds.
It's the same playbook.
It is. White supremacy frames racial minorities as inherently inferior. Male supremacy frames women as inherently flawed, duplicitous, and manipulative. Both use biological determinism to argue that their preferred systems of dominance and hierarchy are natural and inevitable.
And is this statistical relationship observable?
It is quantifiable. There's a strong statistical relationship between high male supremacy scores and high scores on the racial resentment scale, which measures hostility toward Black Americans. This suggests a shared underlying psychological architecture that relies on justifying group dominance and hierarchy across different dimensions of identity.
Within the manosphere itself, this convergence manifests in complex and often contradictory ways, like the just be white theory.
The just be white, or JBW theory, is a specific, complicated narrative often appropriated by non-white users, sometimes known as ethnophils. The theory posits that white men have inherent easy success with women due to pervasive societal privilege.
That's fascinating. They use the language of critical race theory.
They use the language of privilege, sometimes borrowed and twisted from those concepts, to justify misogynistic campaigns against women, particularly women of their own race or ethnicity, who date outside their group.
So they take the concept of white privilege, which they would normally reject as blue pill nonsense, and use it only to explain why they are failing, thereby blaming the women who exercise choice.
It's a remarkable twist of ideological maneuvering. The ultimate goal isn't to address racial inequality, but to reinforce male supremacy and traditional gender roles within their own community by externalizing their dating failure onto a perceived racial advantage held by white men.
And on the white supremacist side, the manosphere's ideas about male virility are often tied directly into these grand conspiracy theories.
Absolutely. White supremacist versions often integrate male supremacy into the Great Replacement theory. This theory argues that feminism, coupled with immigration policy, constitutes an intentional, organized plot designed to emasculate Western or white men.
And the goal is what?
The goal is theorized to be allowing hypermasculine non-white men to take over by reproducing with white women, thereby destroying the white race. In this extremist framework, male virility and sexual vigor are directly tied to the preservation and defense of whiteness.
This entire structure, from the alpha male to the Great Replacement theory, is fundamentally reliant on the idea that biology is fixed, immutable, and dictates destiny. This reliance on pseudoscience is crucial to the manosphere.
The ideology completely collapses without biological determinism. They rely on a profound misinterpretation of evolutionary psychology to cement existing power structures, arguing that biology is unchangeable by culture. They use these appeals to make patriarchal norms seem inevitable.
Let's start with the most obvious misuse, the alpha male idea.
The alpha male concept, which is a foundational concept for the WLA factor in the red pill, was fundamentally debunked by the very scientist who coined the term during his studies of wolves.
He took it back.
He did. He observed a dynamic he initially called alpha, but later realized he was merely observing parental behaviors, a parent-child dynamic, not a permanent genetically determined dominance hierarchy. The concept has virtually no real bearing on the complexity of human social relations, yet it remains gospel within the manosphere because it justifies the hierarchy they crave.
And when we look at actual human evolution, does biology support their claim of inevitable male dominance?
In fact, the biological evidence points in the opposite direction. Human beings exhibit relatively low sexual dimorphism compared to many other primate species.
And sexual dimorphism is?
It's the difference in appearance between males and females of a species in size, shape, and so on. In evolutionary psychology, low sexual dimorphism typically predicts that the genders should be relatively equal in social status, which directly contradicts the idea that biology dictates rigid male dominance.
So the scientific facts often directly refute the Manosphere's deterministic claims. What is the fundamental logical error they make when they argue that biological facts necessitate a certain social order?
That is the is-ought fallacy, a foundational error in philosophy. They argue that because something is a certain way in nature, a descriptive claim, it therefore ought to be that way in human society, a normative or ethical claim.
Right, what is isn't what should be.
Exactly. They believe their claimed biological differences dictate moral or social ideals. But this is a logical non sequitur. The human desire for social, political, or economic equality is an ethical and cultural choice, completely separate from whether minor biological differences exist between the sexes.
If they reject mainstream science and objective logic, where do they turn for information and validation? This must rely heavily on a profound loss of trust in mainstream institutions.
The manosphere thrives in an environment where trust in mainstream media, government, and universities is systematically eroded. If you reject those institutions, you create an information void that the manosphere's clear-eyed conspiratorial narratives are perfectly designed to fill.
And they cite specific instances of perceived media bias as the moment their trust broke.
They do. And this reinforces the red pill idea that the system itself is lying to them. They often point to perceived double standards in coverage, citing examples like how some mainstream outlets treated President Biden's gaffes or mental fitness differently than they treated President Trump's scandals.
Any other examples?
Another frequently cited example is the coverage of the Covington Catholic student confrontation, where initial mainstream reports were perceived by many conservatives as premature and overly critical. They also point to selective coverage or language use, like the downplaying of violence during the 2020 riots, labeling them fiery but mostly peaceful protests.
And for those already suspicious, this is all the proof they need.
For those already inclined toward suspicion, these perceived failures of objectivity reinforce the belief that the entire system is part of the conspiracy against them, leading them straight into the arms of the red pill, where the information is filtered only to confirm their victim status.
It creates a perfectly closed loop. Institutional failure fosters suspicion. That suspicion is immediately validated by online communities that provide an all-encompassing ideological answer, and that answer, in turn, fuels deeper distrust in the outside world, accelerating the radicalization process. This deep dive has shown us the dark architecture of this ideology. The red pill offers the initial intoxication of secret knowledge and superiority, promising power and status if one adheres to the rigid, toxic, and sexist rules of the contemporary hegemonic ideal, the rich, high testosterone alpha. Yet the vast majority of men who try to follow this path inevitably fail to achieve that impossible ideal. They discover they cannot simply will themselves to high status, wealth, or biological attractiveness. For them, the only path left is the black pill, a total deterministic nihilism.
The fundamental conflict for many of these young men lies in the distance between that unattainable ideal self, the identity prescribed by toxic masculinity, what some psychologists refer to as the tyranny of the should, and their real self. The ideology promises that investment in domination, misogyny, and performance will bring them rewards, power, sex, and status. But when this performance fails to deliver, the men are left not just with personal disappointment, but with profound alienation and the crushing resignation that their failure was simply genetically predetermined, or that the world is structurally rigged against their very existence. Male supremacy does not solve their initial isolation or loneliness. It systematically codifies it, providing a political excuse for their personal pain and trapping them in a fatalistic loop. The vocabulary of the red and black pill is a radicalizing engine that weaponizes the desire for community and intimacy, replacing genuine human connection with a pseudoscientific framework that transforms personal difficulty into political grievance, convincing those who feel excluded that the world is not only unfair, but structurally rigged against their very existence.